Good morning and welcome to Office Hours. It's good to have you all here. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour is always general discussion about production-related questions. So we have a lot of questions this morning. Looking forward to that. Second hour is typically a deeper dive into a topic, and we're really delighted today. The second hour, our dear friend Charles Kline is going to come in. He's an expert in color correction and color management. So if you have questions about that topic, be sure to use the interface and get in here and get your questions in. Charles is great at talking you through this incredibly important thing with all the cameras out there, be able to get them to match and things like that. We'll be talking about all of that in the second hour. Okay, let's dive into questions. Who's up first? Mitch?
Thank you, Bill. Rupert McRae from Dallas, Texas. Can Teams still only produce 720p?
And Jason, whoops, is it Jason Bates? It's going to start out soft. Yes. No, Teams. I'm not seeing that. Oh, there we go. Okay. Courtney and then Alex. Courtney, you're up.
Well, according to Microsoft, they do support 1080p now. It does depend on your bandwidth. So you have to have enough up and down bandwidth to support 1080p, and they test it constantly. So if you think you have it, you may not if you're not getting 1080p. And I'm not sure whether you have to request it or not. Maybe Alex knows the answer to that.
Alex, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, it says on the documents that it'll handle up to 1080p. I've never actually seen that in the wild. So, and I don't know anybody who has. So I'm not sure. It may be very sensitive to exactly what it thinks you need to get to 1080p. And I'm not sure if you need to make a request or not. It does say that it goes up to 1080p. The guidelines that it has of what kind of bandwidth that you need to get to 1080p is 4 megs a second, which would be very low for that amount of pixels. So I'm not, there's also the quality of pixels. So I think that, in general, Microsoft is trying not to put lots of pressure on corporate networks and so on and so forth. So I bet you that it's pretty rare to see 1080p on Teams.
Okay, next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. Morning, guys. Sorry I can't be with you. Question, where can I rent up to 20 iPhone 12s or 13s for around 10 days? Don't need cell service, just shooting video for post-production in a scattered way. Ideally, they could come provisioned by an MDM.
Courtney, do you have a location for these?
Yeah, you might try Rent-A-Center, rent-a-center. They have a number of outlets in the Dallas area, and they have a cell phone store. Now, the big question is whether they do a short-term rental of 10 days or not. But they probably do have iPhone rentals, and since there's a number of them in Dallas's area, they might be able to gather up the 20 that you need. They may not have 20 at one store, but give them a check.
Okay, looks like that moves us on to the next question.
Michael Forrest in London, UK. Why does the Atem Mini introduce such a noticeable video delay, and is there a way to reduce this on the hardware itself instead of, for example, adding audio delay and eCam?
Jason's going to start us out here.
Easiest way, just right off the bat, is to set your frame rates uniform, and that is 2997, for example. If that's what you're targeting, you want 2997 going into everything if possible. That will lessen your delay, but really your best bet here is just go through the camera. That'll fix it.
And Alex?
Yeah, the video delay itself, it's resyncing those every same. And I don't know with the ATEM, I don't know if it automatically does that all the time or not. So I'm not certain that you can line your cameras up with their outputs with the inputs of the ATEM and get rid of that delay. I think it may resync the HDMI inputs no matter what it gets, and that means there's going to be a slight delay of a frame or two, for it to do that. So that I think that may actually be happening for all of them. With SDI switchers, we can gen lock these, and then that's going to reduce that to 0. But I'm not certain that you can do that with the and I don't think you'll be able to do it with the new ATEMs either, because I don't think they have gen lock. So I think without gen lock, you're going to end up with a little bit of variance that goes on in both the scaling as well as syncing the frames.
And Peter Sargent.
Well, I ran into this very early on when I failed to read the fine print in the manual that says if you have 2 or more cameras, it'll always try and sync to the first camera. Camera 1 position on the Atem Minis and Mini Pro Extremes is it sets the pace.
If you have it set to automatic.
Yeah.
So if you don't, it only uses one for that sync if you set it to automatic.
Right.
And isn't there a difference between the first input and the second one on the ATEMs? They have one of those kind of a higher speed thing for computers.
It's a slightly lower latency. The one is a little bit different. And the other thing about, the ATEMs, input one is almost in many different devices that Blackmagic makes is a little dangerous because they use things quietly. Like for instance, if you have time code going into like a clean switch, and you lose it on input one, it will, you can sometimes see it ripple across the entire switch. So there's a lot of things about input one that we usually handle that one input with care.
Courtney has a thought here.
Yeah, you mostly covered it. It does use input one as the reference, even though there's not a separate reference in. So if your cameras are Genlock together, if you have cameras that have Genlock in and you have them tied to a common sync source, and then one of those cameras goes into input one, then you will get the lower latency. But unless they're all sunk up together, nope.
Okay. I think that covers it. Let's move on.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. AT&T seems to be offering large sign-on bonuses for installers. I see fiber build-out projects in progress almost always every drive I take around town. Any other places? Are they revving up?
Alex?
I think everyone's almost all the cable networks are trying to rev up. But this is partially a competition with 5G. As 5G rolls out, the folks who have put a lot of money into the ground want to make sure that they continue to benefit from that. AT&T is playing both sides of it with fiber as well as 5G. But I think that obviously, I don't think it's going fast enough, but obviously there's a huge opportunity with the work from home in many, many locations around the United States to provide faster and more stable bandwidth finally for people that are outside of major areas. And so I think you'll probably see a lot more fiber rollout as we move forward.
Okay, moving on. Next question.
Tim Holm from San Lorenzo, California asked, I attended a streaming funeral yesterday. The main speaker had what looked like a DPA mic along the side of the bow of his glasses instead of down by his mouth. He sounded great, but I hadn't seen this before. Is this an acceptable use and location for it?
And let's start with Jason.
Absolutely. If you've ever heard of Penn & Teller, Penn Jillette has a microphone in his glasses, and he always sounds great on stage. So the short answer is yes, unless wind is going to get in the way. Absolutely.
And Courtney.
Yeah, Jason pretty much covered it. It's used quite a bit. The only problem you're going to run into is if the person has to do one of those, take the glasses off and make a dramatic statement, then it's going to be a problem for you. But the DPA, they ran some tests and they found the best placement for it was right in the middle of the forehead, at the top of the forehead. So it's not quite as ideal as that. That's why you see it in that position in a lot of Broadway plays. But it is visible a lot of the time if it's not hiding in the hairline.
And Alex.
Yeah, we've used both DPAs and Countryman. Without the headset, they make both of them make versions of their microphones that are just on a small wire. And we've run them right along the someone's glasses on the inside, especially if they have a slightly thicker glasses frame. And we put it right on the edge there, and it works surprisingly well. It's been a very, very useful one. Now it is pointed out; it's a little bit further away. It's not going to sometimes the noise rejection will be a little bit less, but oftentimes in a quieter studio or in a quieter location without too much going on, it works really well.
It's just, you're taking me back. I once had a friend who worked on Broadway a good little bit, and I had seen Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is a show where the lead actor, in this case it was Sam Harris, who was a performer on one of the television win everything voice type shows. And he had a beautiful voice, and it was clear as a bell, but he was on stage in nothing but essentially a diaper during the Egypt scene. And I said, how in the world did they mic this guy? And my friend said, here's what they do. They put a hair mic in, run the cord down his back, use a thing called moleskin, which you've probably seen, and makeup to put the transmitter down in his diaper. And the point of the whole thing is these pros doing things like Broadway shows have an amazing array of tricks for hiding microphones and still getting superb quality sound. It's worth studying some of their techniques. Let's move on. Next question.
Sky Gleason, Seattle, Washington. Is anyone else attending the online Building a Video Studio from Keycode Media?
Ooh, that'd be interesting. Sky, you have thoughts?
Well, I'm curious. Prior to office hours, Keycode was a very good friend, as well as Guy Cochran. But Mike Kavanaugh over there has installed a lot of productions, systems into a lot of different locations across the nation anyway. And so I was just curious if other people are participating in this event today, because it is online. And it's from a manufacturer point of view. So it's like an NAB. You take it with a grain of salt because they're going to tell you the best about their thing.
Yeah, and Alex wants to weigh in. And Alex?
Yeah, so the challenge with integrators in general is that they do a lot of integration. They just don't do a lot of production. So the advantage the guy has, in my opinion, is the guy does a lot of this stuff. He's building things. He's doing things. He's working with those things. He's very practical about when he's thinking about what's doing it, because he's out there and he's been a camera operator and he's run all this stuff. He runs it in his office. But I don't see a lot of integrators like that. Most of them, now they're very knowledgeable about the hardware. They know how to put it together. They go to all the classes. They do all the things. It's just that they haven't done a lot of production. And when we walk into studios that have been built by an integrator, a lot of times we just find things that aren't quite set up the way we would set them up. Anyway, so I think that's the thing that we usually notice.
Yeah, I've had the same kind of experience with some people who have come in with tons and tons of theoretical and study knowledge, but haven't actually been in the seat. It's just a little bit different, and sometimes that's not a good surprise. Sometimes it works out okay. Next question. Let's move on.
From Tim Home in San Lorenzo, California, simple setup for an IMAG in a hotel room, 2 microphones at a boardroom table, Zoom on a large monitor for those that want to join remotely, 1 projector to the screen. I need to switch between Zoom and the room with no echo or feedback.
This one doesn't have anybody with their hand raised.
Sorry,
you want to? Yeah. You got a lot of things going on. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. So the main thing is that if you're going to do any processing to the audio, you can't. The echo cancellation won't work anymore, and even then, it's a little dangerous. What you're really looking for is something with an auto mixer. You need to have something that's going to push the remote down when the mic is being used, and push the mic down when the remote's being used. And that is something that it's a delicate touch to make that work. Again, there was an app that used to do, or a piece of hardware called Octopus that sure bought, and we haven't seen what they're going to do with it. But that did that fairly effectively. But we haven't seen another version of that. So typically we use an X32 for smaller events like this. Now you can also look at the Midas 32. It's the core, the Midas core, which is if you're doing mostly Dante, if everything else is Dante, it literally is like a little 1U, and it'll have the processing in it. But otherwise, an X32, it works pretty well. I don't know of anything smaller than an X32 currently available for that does the auto mix. I mean, of course, the Mix Pre's have auto mix as well, but I don't know if the Mix Pre 3 would be getting close to the X32 cost. So that'd be something to think about.
Peter.
I'll go to the other extreme with the, I'll call it the hack that I use, because I do this about once a month at my local Scout Council, and I use the mics coming in through my Blackmagic 6K Pro and feed that through a capture card into my my MacBook, and then I have an external speaker plugged into my MacBook and the TV plugged into my MacBook. And believe it or not, Zoom's auto cancellation will work under those circumstances.
Peter, the input, mic input on the Blackmagic 6K is mono, though, is it? Do you just mix the multiple mics down to mono?
I'm not worried. It's just a bunch of folks in a room. I'm not worried about. I just want people to. It's a hybrid meeting that they insist on running, and I use the word insist quite deliberately. I don't agree with it, but I just want people to see. Here's the people on Zoom. That's what's on the TV. They can hear the people in the room. The people on the Zoom session can talk back through the speaker. And like I said, the Zoom cancellation works just fine under those circumstances.
Good to know. And Courtney wants to say
and
something.
if you don't use if you can't use the Zoom cancellation, the Zoom brand Audio F6 mixer does have auto mix on it, and you could feed the 2 room mics, the desk mics, and into 2 inputs, and the audio output from your your large screen monitor, if it's a large screen monitor that's getting audio sent to it over HDMI, you could plug into the headphone output of that and take that in to one of the inputs on the F6 and then set that to auto mix and have that feeding your PA system.
Okay, hopefully, Tim, we took care of it for you. Let's move on to the next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, PA. Will the release of the ATEM SDI Switchers displace any of the existing HDMI lineup, or will they inherit the new firmware enhancements? The product page still features 3 Mini models, but has buried the Extreme ISO onto the Atem Mini page.
Alex.
Well, I think they kind of pushed everything, obviously the SDI stuff to the front so that they can really talk through it. I think that I don't think the HDMIs are going anywhere. I think that they're great desktops. They're great smaller productions. The big advantage of the SDI, I mean, we've talked about a couple of them yesterday, but one of the things that I was really thinking about is also just being able to do longer runs. So, I mean, really you're always having to convert in and out of HDMI if you're going to go any longer than a couple, 40 feet. And really for a lot of the stuff less than that, 20, 30 feet. The SDI runs are going to allow you to do a lot more in that area. So I think that I think that the both of them, there's no reason for them to get rid of one or the other. So I have a feeling that HDMI will stick around.
Sky?
I believe both will stick around, but the phrases that come to mind are market saturation and also the use case. I think the HDMI was the best for the market at the time. But I think, again, it was used by a lot of people that are prosumers. They didn't know they needed it, and they were able to use it because that was what was available in the moment of need. So I'm going to be real curious a year from now. I don't think they're going to sell as many of the SDIs a year from now as they will with the HDMI. So I think the HDMI is probably going to stick around, but Alex is going to respond to that as well.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a good chance that Sky's right. I mean, I think that the HDMIs could still do pretty well, but I think that the HDMIs have sold, I mean, I'm going to guess hundreds of thousands of units, and so there's an awful lot of people using them. But I still think that there's a lot of room to grow for both Blackmagic and others in this area because I mean, we're really just getting started, and as more and more people work from home, and as more and more people realize that how they look and how they occur on the makes a difference. Salespeople and managers and people who just want to be listened to, are going to, I think, spend more and more time, with a little bit, just adding a little bit extra, the ability to do a telestrator, the ability to cut to another camera or a presentation. Those kinds of things are going to keep on happening, I think.
Yeah, what you said about this being very much like what you wear into a business meeting always resonated with me. Your appearance is your appearance. So, and Sky, no, who was it? Courtney, you wanted to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I tried raising my hand, and it's discriminating against me for some reason. It's not letting me name it. I was going to say the SDI. Unfortunately, the SDI doesn't have any HDMI outputs on it, and that's where I guess maybe they thought, well, at least we'll sell a lot more adapters to go out because a lot of people are going to take one of the outputs, the SDI outputs, and run them into a television set, which probably only has HDMI in for the multi-view or for other monitoring. And the other problem is, a lot of times you're going to be feeding a laptop in for graphics. So you're going to need a converter for that to convert your HDMI output into an SDI input on the SDI versions. I thought they, on their earlier versions of the HD, ATEM HD, they have both. They have the first 4 inputs have either or. You can go in either SDI or HDMI. That would have been a better choice, in my opinion, so that you could choose maybe 4 inputs. You could go either way, but not both. So it's interesting that maybe it's because they didn't have room for the connectors, but it's interesting that they made it exclusively SDI with no HDMI inputs.
You mentioned dongles. Does anybody know if they have active electronics in the SDI to HDMI dongles, or are they just pin-to-pin pass-throughs?
There's electronics.
There's electronics, so they're active. Right. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. Alex, you wanted to weigh in something else?
Yeah, no, I think that there was one of the switchers that I think one of the 2Me's long ago had 2 HDMIs, and that was really what we needed. Like we need half of them. There was one that had half and half, and then we were no man's land. Like it was like, oh, we always had a couple extras that didn't work one way or the other. But the two of me that had two were just like a compute, one or two computers or a computer in this, and it seemed to be the right mix of those. So I do agree with Courtney that like one or two of those inputs would make a big difference. But I think that there is some opportunities that we're looking at with the Extreme that the density is really interesting of having 8 in that that size and that form factor. Pretty cool.
Nice. All right. Next question.
And this is from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, PA. Besides taste, what are some practical factors in determining a photographic background sheet for a talking head video? Wardrobe, subject complexion, lighting, distance from background, etc.
And go ahead, Alex.
I try to stick with neutral / cooler colors. I find that when people have warmer colors, they tend to just fade into it. So that tends to be for everybody. So I think that it's very rare that people look better with big warm backgrounds. Sometimes there's occasions where we have stuff with backgrounds that make a difference there. They can be popping red and yellow and stuff like that. But it's few and far between, and not right when they're right behind the person. So a lot of times we try to have that be neutral, at least right behind the head, and then if there's flourishes of warm colors, we put them kind of off to one side or the other. Remember that reds tend to compress in H.264 very badly, so we try to keep those out of there. I'm not a big fan of the modeled background. Like the ones that they have, like the general, like little, just general, I don't know, what looks like dirt to me, is back there, and those what I call the dirt backgrounds. I don't, and probably because I think of them as dirt backgrounds. That's a red pill, by the way. You'll never be able to see them the same way again. Like all those ones with that modeled background just look like dirt. So I prefer not to put those behind people, unless I want to make them feel like they're in a cave. I like them to be a little bit more basic. I mean, I really, for most backgrounds, love to find a place to put them, and not put a background behind them unless I have to. I mean, green screen is what I do a lot. If we don't like the background, a lot of times when we're interviewing people, we light up a green screen really, really nicely, and then we'll choose it later. But I think that I think that cooler backgrounds, more basic backgrounds, those types of things. And if you're going to have them there, try to get them as far back as you can. That's the real problem too, is that you want them to be out of focus. I mean, because especially if they're dirt, you want them to be out of focus.
Moving to Sky.
Well, no, I am not a portrait photographer, but to Alex's point, what is it that you want people to take away from this visual image? And so consequently, you're looking at contrast, and color, like music, is also an emotional medium. So you're going to be projecting an emotion with that. Often you'll see a movie poster, and you'll see that the blues and the reds are very popular, or the subtle versions of those, because it is the contrast often of the skin. So that's and I thought of the backdrop, Alex. Yes, I have used a drop cloth before. So it was just full of paint spatters, and it was looking to try to give some kind of texture back there, but not so much that it was in competition with, again, the eyeballs are what people are looking at.
I do like folds. So I think people do drop backgrounds, and they create like some designs with the folds. Yeah. And I think that those folds look nice, subtle. But they look like we did something, hopefully, on purpose. And so the folds, I think, look nice. I think they look, and the other thing to think about is what can you color with light? So there you go. If you use a gray background, you can do whatever you want back there. And like, that's what I'm doing here. And this is a little bluish right now. I could make it greenish or reddish or whatever. So the gray background with some lights can also help a lot.
Mitch.
And Alex just touched on the two reasons that I have this background is I wanted it to pick up the blue wash light that I have, and that means that it's going to be gray. And I have the modeling or dirt there just to give it some contrast, and the folds give it some feeling. I could pull it all the way across, but
where's the dirt? Oh, is it?
It's out of focus.
It's way back there. It's way back there.
Yeah.
What people don't know actually is that's just a drop cloth, like right behind Mitchell. It's like 4 feet, and it's just a flat picture. It's just behind Mitchell. There's actually no studio there.
Well, in my picture, I have
that door works pretty well, Mitchell.
That is a drape on the back wall behind my shot too. Those are just actually double fold curtains. So anyway, Courtney wants to.
Yeah, I like to see something more pertinent to the situation. Like this is why, in news type situations where they're going to their Capitol reporter, they will have a photo of the Capitol behind them, etc. So if you can get a 80-inch monitor and put it behind the person and put your camera far enough away to put it on a long lens to separate the focus away from the background and onto the foreground to give you a narrower depth of field so you won't run into any moire problems. And it also takes the edge off that background and draws attention away from it a little bit. Then you can put whatever is appropriate for the subject matter in the background and not have it be too distracting, and don't have it moving by any measure. But then you can stay flexible and it doesn't look just like somebody stuck a piece of cloth behind the person.
Alex has additional thoughts.
The interesting thing about the folks that are talking in front of the White House or something like that, just as an added detail there, is that in general, you actually they actually are in front of a live feed of the White House. It's a thing because they promise that everything's live, but it doesn't promise that they're actually in front of the White House, but they promise that video, all the video feeds there are live at one time. This is like an EU thing, and so they have a camera that everyone pays for. That high shot of the White House comes from 16th and I, and it's shot of the White House, and everybody uses the same camera, but that camera is fed live into it, so it's not a picture or whatever. I found that to be fascinating when our offices were with all the news organizations, that they all use this one feed, and all of DC uses the same feed from that because it's the right perch, except for the main the ABCs, NBCs, CNN, so on and so forth. They have a little tent right on the inside of the West Gate. There's like 5 or 6 of these little tents that they stand out in front of to do their hits. But it's a funny thing. They're the only ones that get to do it like live. Now, 16th and I they used to have some perches. I was trying to find one because I stood up there for one of them. But they had these little perches that you can stand out there where that camera feed is. But in general, people have moved on, and they're in front of a green screen with an Ultimat. So that's kind of the way it works.
Okay, and a couple last little things, because you mentioned specifically wardrobe. We've all known that there's a lot of, not a lot, but there are a few things in wardrobe that can snap you. Very thin pinstripes and things like that can create some moire patterns. It's less a thing now than it was in the standard definition era, but it is still worthwhile to be a little careful about what you dress people in. Solid white and solid black tends to be a little bit difficult, although again, it's getting better. But you don't see a lot of detail on my shirt, which is by design here, just in case there's something that I don't want people looking at. Dark colors tend to go a little darker. Subject complexion, one of my gurus back in the early days, a fellow named Bill Hilshevnikov, used to give a lot of lighting things, showed us once in a demo that you can take people of different complexions. If you've lit a scene correctly, you can put anybody in that shot and it'll still look fabulous. There are a few things about exposure that you could tweak a little bit, but generally good lighting and a good, well-balanced scene will work for almost everybody. And I think that's probably enough. We've talked about everything else here. Let's move on.
JHB in New York. Is there a third-party physical T-bar that can be used with the Atem Mini Extreme? There are times I just want to manually control the speed of the transition, especially doing music videos. Thanks.
Jason Bache.
Yes, if you actually want a physical T-bar, X Keys does make one. The easy way to do this is something Fenwick's done for quite a while, which is just, the little Rode MIDI compliant, what are they called? Just the fader bar. And you can map those very easily.
Okay. Did somebody come in? Yes, Alex and Mitch. So Alex, take it away.
Yeah, Skarhoy makes a variety of different boards that have the T-bar in them. In fact, I think they have some pretty small ones that are almost just the T-bar, as well as JL Cooper. I think that one of the things that you want to do as soon as you buy one, when you can still send it back, check the resolution of the movement. So the tricky part with the T-bar is when you're moving very, very slowly, what is the resolution for every degree that it's going to register? I'll be honest with you, I even find that the Blackmagic ones that are built into their switchers are a little low resolution. And so right at the very end of that transition, I feel like it drops off and it's not quite as soft. So in a more expensive fader, so a JL Cooper, T-bar in the higher end panel bars will have a higher resolution. So not just note that not all T-bars are made equally. It's not just a T-bar, and it's that resolution of how that T-bar drives what's theirs. And the way to know is do something that's about a 2-second transition with your T-bar, then hit auto and do it again. Just do it with auto, do the exact same transition and then compare those, because the auto will do it perfectly. But the T-bar is taking it as you move it. And I've noticed that, again, even very slow transitions with a Blackmagic, it's not the same as some of the larger switcher panels that I've used in the past.
And Mitchell.
Yeah, +1 on the Skarhoy. I agree with Alex.
And Courtney?
And ATEM used to make their external control panel that you could plug in. It connects over Ethernet and does the same control as the software does. So you can get one that has physical controls from ATEM, from Blackmagic.
Okay, moving to the next question.
Andre Dole from Berlin. Zoom Rooms NDI test. I have a laptop with licensed Zoom Rooms and activated NDI, an iPad as controller, and a vMix laptop for NDI input. What else do I need to test Rooms NDI in after hours? Is the new higher amount of NDI outs available instantly?
And it's a very good question. I think a lot of people would be interested in that, but I don't do this kind of work. So I guess you may be missing today on somebody who wants to weigh in on the new stuff and how it works in terms of the NDI inputs. This would be a good one for, I think, Guy if he was here. But Guy, you may want to just hold on to the question, bring it back another day. There's Alex. Okay, great. Al, thank you, Alex.
Yeah, so a bunch of us are doing tests right now. We'd probably recommend against having everybody start to test NDI within after hours. But if people reach out to me, we can set up some labs where we can do that. So I'm open to setting up a lab. Sometimes on Fridays, you'll see us testing it from my office as we do some output tests. But I think that in general, I'm open to creating a lab time. And it's just a matter of finding out the right time to do that. But, there's like 2 hours that we know that we're going to go do a test. And you'll see when I do it, because sometimes I'll run out and go, hey, we're testing things. Does anyone want to show up? So maybe that's a good time to also test your stuff as well. So I think that when we do it that way, and I think we may do it tomorrow, so we'll stay tuned. I'm assuming I get a negative test today. So anyway, tomorrow we may be experimenting with that. So stay tuned.
Fingers crossed. And I'm hoping you're feeling a lot better.
I'm feeling better. No, just not negative yet.
Yeah, I hear you. Moving on. Next question.
Svetlana from Belarus, Minsk has a question. Good morning to everybody. I asked my question several days ago, but Mukana seems it didn't manage to catch my messages. So I'm asking it again. What is Apple's culture at working teams now, and what was it before the pandemic?
Alex is going to give us some insight.
I don't think that anybody here knows what that culture is precisely, and even if they did, they wouldn't say, because then they'd never know again. So I think that. So anyway, I think it'd be hard to do that. What I can say is that in general, most of the companies have had to figure out a way to work remotely and how to hand files back and forth. And for the most part, many teams in many different companies have found that they were getting just about the same amount done as they were doing when they were in the office. And so they, while some of them like to come back to the office, I think that there are a fair number of them that would not. I think companies have found that without people coming to the office and without that corporate culture that comes with being there and kind of feeling the grandness of being in the office and everything else, the employees have become a little bit more difficult. So I think I think there is a thing where a lot of companies would prefer to bring people back because there's a certain level of, oh, you're here. And, I think that for people who work, I used to work at Lucasfilm and at a facility called Skywalker Ranch. And, when you drove in, there was a certain level of, holy smokes, I work here, and that had a certain effect on how you complained, you're like, well, it's bad, but I still work here, so if something wasn't working, it wasn't bad. I mean, Lucasfilm was a fun place to work. But I would say that, like, if you're having a hard day, you'd be like, yeah, but look outside. I mean, I'm working at Skywalker Ranch. And so I think that for an Apple, it's the same kind of thing where there's a big spaceship and there's beautiful trees and Pacific Madrones. Anyway, so there's all this stuff around it, and I think that for some people that reminds you, oh, it's pretty special, And I think that when they're not there, they get caught up more in the minutia of being in a large corporate culture.
Peter,
I was going to say, I mean, having worked for 33 years for a large corporation that had a very distinct corporate culture. And the programming side of the house, I would absolutely agree with what Alex was saying, that there was, and other ancillary jobs. The one place where work from home and during the pandemic had significant problems was, I worked on the actual hardware engineering team. And under those circumstances, it's very hard to work from home because it's very hard to pass, prototype circuits over Zoom.
That makes sense. We get the teleporter requirement here, and we don't have it quite sorted yet. It's interesting, just as an observer of Apple from the outside. There's also, Apple used to be the young, pirate flag over the building company, and the Steve Jobs era was a go era of tremendous innovation, and they're still doing a lot of innovation there, and I'm not diminishing that at all. But it does seem like their corporate culture has changed under Tim Cook, and he had different requirements of what he needed to do, and it's been wildly successful, as benefits a company who's on the top of most lists of one of the most profitable and successful companies on the planet. It seemed to me that they're out of their youth and they're into middle age, and there's going to be maybe the beginnings of middle age, who knows, but they have a lot of different cultural touchstones. And I do think that this work from home thing, I think it's been difficult for at least Tim Cook and the management team, and I'm purely guessing as an observer from the outside, to figure out these highly, highly talented artists who are known to be a little, they've got a lot of creativity, a lot of drive, and they're at the top of their profession. I was reading an article about the Johnny Ives era coming to an end and things like that, and just the emotional parts of that, and how people fit into these mega enterprises and what motivates them to do the best work of their lives. I think it's going to be a transition as they move into this new distributed, not everybody's in the same pod hearing the same things. Alex, you had more thoughts?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to say is that Apple did try to bring everybody back when we watched this from the outside. Tried to bring everybody back, and then they started losing a lot of people, and then they stopped. So I think that regardless of whether people think that it's a better solution, and it might be better in some cases, there's a certain percentage of your high performance employees that are younger, or sometimes older. I think that as someone who just came out of having COVID, I think COVID has an effect on how you look at life. Like, it definitely has it for me, and you spend some time where you can't think about anything really, and you're just kind of pondering, like, what am I doing here? And was all this worth it? And was everything that we're doing and everything else? And so I think that there is I think that we underestimate how much COVID, not just changing the way we work, but the people who had it, which is like a third of the country. I think a lot of people, for some people, didn't have any effect, but I think for some of us, it was kind of this. I know for me, it's been a kind of a moment, that I've rethought a bunch of things, and so anyway, that's all.
I've heard a lot of people have come through that say it was a bit of a wake up moment. So I think,
So I think then a lot of people are going, I want to have more time with my family. I don't want to spend, a quarter of my life in my car. I don't want to do all these other things. And so I think that companies are going to have a really hard time, because I think they think it's just because they were working away, but I think it's partially because they had COVID. they came back and didn't want to play the same game anymore because they just realized that life is short, so.
Yeah, also, one thing, and I'm just saying this because I was watching a good number of the Worldwide Developer Conference videos that afterwards, and they're on the Apple website. You can go see them now. The stunning diversity of the talent at Apple. I mean, it's just astonishing. You click from one video to another, and there couldn't be more polar opposites in your impression of these two people. And yet both of them are world class at their disciplines. And you just see, it's not like you're getting all these people in IBM white shirts with ties to do this kind of in a regimented. These people have a tremendous diversity of the lifestyles they want to live and how they want to spend their life. I would imagine those people are not easy to corral into telling them you have to do it this way, but they're brilliant. And if you give them the right creative environment, they produce exceptional work. So interesting thing. I'm sure management will be talking about this in business seminars for decades to come. Let's move on to the next question.
The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, guys. We have a Godox UL150 with soft lantern as a key light. Would you suggest swapping it out for a wide matte light, Amaran F22C, or a panel light, Aputure Nova P300 for classes, interviews, etc.? Or would you do more Godox UL150s?
And Courtney's going to start us off.
I guess it kind of depends on how much portability you need. The Godox are a small little fixture that have a little cob LED in there that emulates kind of a point source, and I assume you're using this soft lantern as a diffuser that goes in front of it, kind of like a chimera or any type of ripstop nylon that goes in front of it to diffuse the light so you don't get hard shadows. They fold down pretty small, and if that lantern is foldable and can go into a case, then it might be preferable for you. It depends on how much portability. If you're going to be using something in a permanent setup, I would go with something cheaper, maybe. More like these panel lights. I'm using these Newers that you can get two of them with stands and power supplies. They also work on batteries. And they have, they're a large panel, so they give a nice soft light. They're dual color, so they have both LED, and both 9,000 and 3,200 LEDs, and you can tune across that color spectrum from one to the other evenly. So they're very good about that. And they're edge-lit piece of plastic or glass, so you don't see any points of light, so you don't generate multiple shadows. The ones that you pointed out are all RGB WW, which means they're two colors of white, 32 and plus RGB. So you can use those for effects lighting, like if you have to simulate the police are arriving at your house or something. It can flash blue and red. Or
Alex. Oh, I'm sorry.
You can use the other colors to tune, but I think the CRI on a lot of those gets a bit wonky, and once you start adding the color from the RGB LEDs in there, your color rendition kind of goes way off.
Alex?
Yeah, the ones that we've really liked for interviews. Now, classes could be a little bit different. The other problem you have is that some of these could require different kinds of lights. But for interviews, we really like the source to be as large as possible, and for the light itself to be as lightweight as possible. And this is an example of one of the interviews we did a couple years ago. This is with a light mat, LITEMAT, and these are 2x4s across the front, and then onto the side you can kind of see. I don't have a better picture of this right now, but it's a 4x4, and these things just pop open. They are LEDs that just roll out, and they have diffusers on the front. And wow, do they look good? They look good, and they're really easy to work with for us. Now, they're not inexpensive; those aren't inexpensive lights, and the Aputure ones probably are a little less expensive. But they were. That's the first time I've used them. The DP brought them in, and we were just super impressed with the big, large for interviews. 4 feet, make everybody look really good.
And I'm going to weigh in on this a little bit too, because I do a good little bit of lighting. So it depends on what you're trying to do. If you just want to do interviews and all you're going to do is wrap light around, both of those things are absolutely fabulous. The one advantage that I would see as somebody who's done a lot of lighting of the Godox kind of, that has a Bowen's mount. You can tell if you see that little kind of short reflector on the front, that is a particular mounting bracket that came out of still photography. There is an almost unbelievable range of accessories that use that Godox mount to put light modifiers on it. So if you're doing something like a wine bottle, you can put a strip bank that'll give you a nice narrow shadow. If you're doing something where you need a big soft source, if the fixture itself has enough light output, and that's one of the things I'd look for, is make sure it has enough lumens coming out of it for a big soft box. You can put it in a soft box. If you want soft light with some control, you can put a fabric grid on that. And there are literally beauty dishes and hundreds of other things that are special purpose that have been designed for the photographic industry that will work with now these hot video lights. If you have that skill set, or if you're interested in learning it, it'll give you a lot more flexibility than one thing for one purpose. However, if what you do is set up interviews over and over again, these rollout lights or a soft bank that is relatively large successfully gets you to the bigger the source is of light relative to your object that you're lighting, the softer the light and the better that a person looks. So both have their place. Just decide what you want to do. All right, next question.
And it's from me. What would be a good camera bag for my Sony FX-3?
This guy's going to work in here.
I started looking because I realized I'm a bag hoarder. I have so many different bags, and I realized a lot of it was vanity, and I wanted the thing that said Tamron or Low Pro or something on it. But the one that I'm really loving into is Think Tank. It's not just any Think Tank, but the sling version of it. And I defocused myself when I did that. Oh dear. And because I would end up carrying a backpack with one shoulder anyway, and then I'd always fill it with way too much stuff. And then the chiropractor loved it because I'd always have to get an adjustment. But the sling bag goes across your chest and either direction, and then you can sling it up in front of you and get access to all your equipment. And it also, they have different varieties of sizes. It keeps you from carrying everything that you own all in one bag. So Think Tank. And I literally physically carried it in and out of my car for over 10 years. And I think one zipper on one corner finally started fraying. So boy, the durability of that product.
Alex.
Yeah, think tanks are great. Also, Peak Design makes really good ones, really well thought out. They kind of have the side pocket process that you can slide things out that I think are really good. Tenba makes some bags that don't look as much like a camera bag. The big thing that, because I work at a lot of different parts of the world, I often don't want my bag to look like a camera bag. And so I look, Tenba has some that look a little more beat up. I try to find, I learned working with a photographer that in Iraq that his just looks like the most beat up sack in the world. When you open it up, it's got all these little pads and things and everything else, but it just looks like a rucksack that is horrible. I think he actually left it out of his house for a little while and let it rain on it. It was all canvas and got moldy and everything else. And then he dried it off and there it is. And so I think that, it depends on where you're going as far as how you want to, slide into the system. My backpack though is a Rush 24. I figure out how I'm going to put I put different lenses and things, but I put cases inside of that. But I've been using a Rush 24 for a decade.
Sky. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Sky, and then come back to Tom. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Real quick. Again, a photographer friend of mine also suggested going to your local Goodwill or some thrift store and getting an old ski bag, because that was the ability to carry your gear, your additional gear, your stands and things like that in a much longer, durable stand. But again, like Alex said, it doesn't say "Steal Me" on it because it doesn't look like a photography kit.
Apologies to the guys on the back end. Tom now, and then we'll finish with Courtney.
Well, I use the Turnstile by Think Tank, but also if you're looking for something that's more general that isn't a camera bag, look at Waterfield.
Okay, we've got some good suggestions there. I'm going to add one more to it. I have a lot of Think Tank equipment. I have a lot of Tenba, Low Pro. But the one that I go to more often is by Case Logic. And the reason I go to it is the entire inside is this ridiculously garish yellow color. And what happens is if I'm on location and I unzip that, even if I'm in low light circumstance, the gear inside is easier to see. Any backpack or camera thing that has little accessories in it, if they make the interior dark, I found it to be much more difficult to work in the back of a shoot without a lot of light. So I pick that one a lot just for that reason. Courtney, we took care of you, right? No, you're still
no, we didn't.
winging it. Okay. There we go.
I'm a fan of Portabrace. They've been making cases for many years, designed custom. The Cinema Alpha, is one that's designed for cameras of that size, and they have spots in them for specifically to put filters and accessories and power supplies and the camera itself, and it shields the lens and the camera body from damage. And if they don't have one specifically for that, that's an older camera, the FX-3, but if they don't have one specifically for it, you can talk to them and they can configure something for you.
There you go. All right. We are actually question rich now for the amount of time we have, so we're going to pick up the pace a little bit, but let's go ahead and next question.
From Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. I've got a challenge and I'm stumped. I have a nonprofit that wants to do a live stream telethon style event. I'm using QR codes and scrolling short URL tickers. What other ways could be have the donation link in the video that would be effective?
Okay, and we're going to try to keep this to a minute each, so Alex, take it off.
QR codes. QR code is the best. It is the ticker is if you use a ticker that's going to ask someone, make a vanity URL that you register something that's really short for your event. It just has to be super short, like no more than 6 characters kind of thing. And whatever that is, because it's just really hard for people to remember and type in. And the QR code tends to work really well. So maybe a bit of both of those things. We usually, when we display it, we have ask this .live or something like that, and we have a QR code. So we put both of them together all the time. And then that tells people what it is, as well as let them type it in if for some reason they can't get the QR code to work.
John Preto.
QR codes are good. And last time we did one of these, we did a texting service. So one of those texting giving me donation platforms worked really well as well.
Okay, next question.
From Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York. Any recommendations for a shock mount for a Birddog P4K? Getting a lot of vibration just mounting it on a C-stand.
Alex.
C-stands are going to notoriously, they're like little antennas that want to bounce back and forth. You're going to have trouble with those. A C-stand is not going to be usually enough. I would expect you to get vibration even when the camera's just moving, regardless of any environmental factors. It's just too small of a pole. A tripod's going to diffuse that a lot, related to that, or something a lot heavier. The things you can do with a C-stand that will help a little bit is actually weight the legs down a lot more. So adding a lot of weight to those legs will tend to reduce the amount that it wants to do that, but it's still a full-length C-stand with something I've done a fair bit of, will tend to vibrate. And so and so that's and now the other thing you can do is if you have a dampening, something that's going to clamp onto that top of that C-stand and run into something, like just go into something there, even if it's pressing up against it, it'll reduce a lot of the vibration that's in that C-stand.
Okay, next question.
From Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York. Is there a kind of pan-tilt zoom platform that will convert an FS7 into a remotely controlled PTZ?
And Alex is going to weigh in. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, telemetrics. A telemetrics head. You set that thing down on a telemetrics head. You can get motors for the lenses, and those can be controlled from the telemetrics head as well. So, but you're looking for a pretty heavy head at that point. There's not going to be telemetrics is heavy, but for an FS7, it's a heavy enough camera that with the lens, you're not going to be able to find something much smaller than a telemetrics head to make that work.
And next question.
John Foltz from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. On the Constellation, there is a panel called Output located next to the Media Players tab. It supports a Decklink card. And what do you use that for?
And Alex is going to help with this.
I have no idea.
Oh. Okay.
I have no idea what that is. I didn't even know that was there. I'm going to have to go look at the Constellation. I was like, why is there a Decklink card there? So we'll try to do some research and figure that out. Thanks for the question.
So, yeah, remember what you asked. Come back, pick another day, and we'll see if we can cover it.
We'll see if we can figure it out, yeah.
Okay, next question.
Greg Swick from Irwin, Pennsylvania. Elgato Stream Deck users, check out the latest software version 5.3.1. A lot of nice upgrades.
Anybody on the panel spend any time with this? And so if this is a new thing out, we may not have enough details. And so you're going to have to wait a couple of days too for everybody to get it out there and discussions to happen.
And this is a good example of somewhere to add a URL, because I was like, oh, I got to find it now. And I couldn't find it before the question came up. So
yeah. So yeah, the earlier the questions come in, the more time we have to look it up and give you good answers. So let's dive into the next question.
David Brady, New York, New York, looking to set up a Zoom room as a looping AV test resource. I've got a BrightSign for looping video player. What are some good sources for test loops that can demonstrably test stereo, frame rate, and resolution?
I don't generally do that. Does anybody have it? Oh, Alex has some thoughts here.
The best one is the SRI test signals. So Sarnoff Research, and these are the ones that anybody who's really testing this is testing this, because what they do is now, I don't know what you're going to get. They're going to show you all kinds of things with a Zoom room that isn't going to work. But what they do is they have movement that will not look, you'll be able to see, sorry, you'll be able to see everything. What's interesting about it is that it will show you bit depth change. It will show you resolution change. It will show you frame rate change. We're working on getting one of these for office hours, and so you'll probably hopefully see one soon. But these test signals give you exactly what you need to really interrogate a signal very, very well. So yeah, and that's those are the best ones.
Thank you. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Net Insight offers virtual training courses on the Nimbra platform. There's a link for it, but they say contact us, your sales rep. Would that probably mean it's very expensive? I'm interested. Alex?
They're expensive. They're not, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, they're not very, very expensive. I think they're in the like 20 grand range or 20. It depends on what size, $15,000 to $30,000 kind of range. They are, but it also means that we're going to train you if you've bought one. Like we're not training everybody to do this. So that's really what when it says contact your sales rep, it means that if you don't have a sales rep, you're probably not the right market for this. That's their way of saying that. And it's not as mean as it sounds. They have a limited number of experts that really know how to do this, and they're very focused on the folks that are generating revenue for them and not kind of creating a general service. It's not really a consumer kind of product.
Yeah, that goes under the general heading of qualifying customers, and a lot of sales organizations do it. And it's not just to make sure you can afford it, it's to make sure you'll have success with the product. It may be beyond the technical level of your organization, and that would just be a bad thing to have happen. Next question.
Darren Cirillo in Dallas, Texas. We've got a FiOS connection at the house that is 150 megabits up and down. I'm getting ads to upgrade to 1 gigabit. My understanding is that the 1 gigabit connection isn't faster, but will allow more devices to stream simultaneously without congestion. Am I correct?
Alex?
Well, it definitely can be faster. It's possible for it to be faster. So I don't know about FiOS in general has been pretty effective at giving you most of that 1 gig, especially if it's up and down. I mean, I know that I have a 1 gig down, 200 up on my Comcast. And I definitely can. I mean, when I want to download something big, if the other side has good speeds, wow, it's fast. 100 megs a second, 100 megabytes a second. Like it's fast, so definitely worth it if you can afford it.
And next question.
Albie Lopez in St. Hedwig, Texas. What is the advantage of using SPX Graphics other than H2R Graphics for office hours? Or is it just preference for the crew on the back end?
Well, I think it's a combination of that plus Tuomo, who is behind SPX Graphics, as a friend of the show, and he's been here to help us understand things. But Alex, you wanted to...
And SPX is a lot more flexible. They both have their own value. So H2R Graphics has a lot of great things that are very easy to turn on and make work. SPX we have more options. I don't know if we use all those options, but both John Barker is the creator of H2R and Tuomo are both friends of what we do. But I think that they solve two different things. And ours, we wanted to have more controls from the way we've done it. So I think that SPX is a little bit more flexible and scalable for what we're doing. And H2R is really a better solution for someone who just wants to turn it on and make it work.
There you go. Next question.
Douglas is back. What would it take to put the Office Hours channel on DirecTV Dish Network? A Nimber at both ends with one end connected to the Constellation and a link to their uplink center.
And Alex is going to start, Mitchell, and we've got about a minute each.
And I think we should leave the next question for the second hour, because I think that would make more sense for Charles. And all I'll say real quick is we don't even need Nimbra or anything else. Nimbra is really good if we needed to have super low latency connection for a live event, or we were trying to push a lot of data and other things through that system. What we do is all we would need really is an RTMP or SRT solution that would send it to an uplink that would make it available to Dish. The big problem with Dish is that we would have to get distribution first. That's why we're looking at doing satellite uplink, and then getting it picked up by a bunch of networks or TV stations and so on and so forth would kind of set up a network to slowly be available on something like a network like YouTube TV or Dish. And it's kind of a long-term campaign.
Okay. Mitchell, you want to make a last thought before we move on to the color section?
Yeah, quickly, DirecTV and Dish both have the same kind of satellite system. Dish is more inclined to rent space out on their system, but neither of them will help us outside of the North American continent.
Fair enough. Okay, then I think it's time to turn our transition. It is 8 o'clock straight up, which means we are moving into the second hour. And today we are delighted to have a friend of mine and a friend of the show's. I think I met Charles because Alex brought him into the show originally, and he's one of our favorite people to have around. Charles is an expert in color grading and more. And I say and more because I think for everybody who makes videos over the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen how important, in fact, how mission critical handling color in a pipeline all the way through can be. And when I was starting out early in my career in the old days, I was working at TV stations, and there was always somebody to do that sort of stuff. So you always had great looking images, and when they got to the edit bay, you didn't have to do anything to them. They looked fabulous. Well, fast forward a couple of years, and people are starting to shoot their own stuff on DSLRs and on phones nowadays, and you have so many different types of footage coming in. And I'll never forget the day that I had to go out and shoot some nighttime stuff, and I didn't realize that this was maybe in the late aughts, and I found myself under sodium vapor lights. I got an ugly lesson in how, depending on the light that's hitting your subject, it can be so bad that you can't even recover it. Everything that I tried to do with that sodium vapor lit footage was a disaster. I couldn't get it to look good. And I realized how critical managing and understanding the light that's hitting your subject wherever you're shooting, and how important it is to get that right. And then all the possibilities in post for improving shots to make them look as good as possible. That is generally the task of the colorist that you bring in to do that. And we're very lucky to have Charles here today. Charles, how have you been?
Team, how have you guys been? I've missed everybody very, very much. I've been very busy and haven't been able to keep up with things, but I see the production has compounded a couple of energy levels. So this is good to see. It's now full global production, dozen people behind the scenes, and it's looking fabulous. So you guys are doing great.
Thank you very much. Well, a lot of that is you're helping us understand over the course of the years and the many times you were here, some of the details of color. And I don't know whether you want to do just kind of an opening or whether you want me to maybe do a little talk about the overall, how color fits into workflows nowadays. What are you seeing out there in the field in your practice? Are there trends that are coming up?
So the main trend right now that's been going on for a while, and we have discussed it a little bit in the past, is how are we going to transform everybody going from a Rec 709 SDR world, going beyond that, going to HDR, P3 Rec 2020, PQ curves, and trying to understand those things, because in 709, we were more constrained artistically, but technically we knew what our boundaries were. Now things have started to flip. Right, so technically, you sort of know what you can do and push, but creatively, you have a lot more freedom. Right, so you know exactly where you can put a skin tone, or a light in the background, or trying to separate, you have a lot more control over that, which before in 709, it was a bit of a push and pull. You would smash things against the Rec 709 wall and try to make it as good as you could. But, you had those constraints. Now the walls have been blown off, and now we're just pushing past that. And now each year with screens getting brighter and brighter, understanding more what texture, what colors naturally are that bright and what is not is the next understanding for people, because a lot of us have made that same mistake where at first you do some HDR and you push everything to the limits until it breaks. And then you start to have an understanding of like, okay, let's bring this back here. This deserves to be out there, close to P3, much brighter. Skin does not glow naturally, so you need to bring that down a little bit, make it look more natural. So having that understanding, and it's a practice that everybody is going through. So the more you do your reps, the better you get at it.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. What I'm hoping to do today for those of you who are enjoying the show is have Charles spend a little bit of time on some of the basics so that if you're just getting started and taking your first tiny steps in, you can understand, when you bring back footage from the field, how do you do a quick, simple base grade and get it acceptable to work with? And then as we move through the process, these kind of things that Charles is talking about as color science really changes, particularly in, I know, these HDR spaces in Rec 2020, which is a bigger luminance and chrominance space. Understanding that's going to be more and more important as we go along. So I'm hoping we can get done on both sides, some basic stuff, some intermediate stuff, and not ignore the advanced stuff that is becoming more and more critical every day. Mitch, you had some thoughts in here in the early days?
Yeah, I do. And it's probably a question, so I apologize for jumping the stack here. But Charles, I'm kind of confused about where to start with setting color grading. Do you start with the camera presets, or do you have everything back to a normal? It's like gain staging for audio, right, and then add stuff. Like, for example, my camera, I'm using S-Cinetone on Sony, yeah, the new name, and a Pro Mist. And I think I look a little pink, but is this look natural? Is this the way we should go?
To me, you're a little magenta, but here's what I would say. That could be a creative decision. And that's a lot of the conversation went up. What is a creative decision, right? And who's making that decision? The first thing I always do is ask, what is my final delivery? What color space I'm delivering to, what gamma, if it's going to be on broadcast, on the web, or you need to understand those things before you even get started. Once you know that, you could reverse engineer your pipeline to get the best results.
And Alex has a thought here.
And if you have to deliver to both HDR and SDR, where do you start?
So this is where your scene referred color space is going to be very important.
What's a scene referred color space?
All right, so scene referred. All right, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit because after the last time I was on, this was a conversation I got a lot afterwards. And trying to understand the difference between what is raw, what is log, what is scene referred, and what is your display referred, right? So going back to the camera, each manufacturer has a Bayer pattern that is attached to their sensor, right? They have their own thing going on. That is the data that you're capturing.
And a lot of them have the same chips, right? So that
yes.
Bayer, but how that Bayer pattern, then they're interpreting it. They're all interpreting, their color science, quote unquote, is interpreting that Bayer pattern, but a lot of them are using the same chips, right?
Yes, but how they process it in the D-Bayer is where things start to go in different directions. Now, the D-Bayer is what turns your raw into log, right? And your log will end up being your working scene referred color space, or for what we can do. It's not a color space that we can see because there's a lot of data. So to us, it's going to look gray and desaturated and muted. We need to then do a transform from scene to display so that on the displays that we can actually recreate that signal so that it looks properly to our eyes. And to
Charles,
the rest
would you call that the base grade, or is there a different term you use for that initial bringing the raw field footage to a workable level?
That wouldn't be a base grade. That would
Good.
just be a technical transform, because you need to have a technical from your scene. to display, right? It's just math. Things past the raw bare data, it's all math. You're technically not changing what you captured. You captured what you captured, and that's the end of that. Past that, you're applying math to push and pull the image in the way that is creatively most attractive to you or your client.
And is that usually applying a LUT? Is that what I'm...
Right. So the LUT is another thing that is a very big conversation, because a LUT is just a lookup table, but a lookup table is essentially one code of values going through a transform that end up in a different code of values. Now, you need to know those 2 points. If not, you're sort of flying blind. So the most common is going from a log or scene referred to a display referred. And display can be, at this point, let's say like an SDR 709, or for some of the more expensive screens, like a P3, right? But that's more of a math application. It's pretty hard to get that wrong. All the manufacturers have come up with their own transform, whether it's let's say from Sony to Canon to Blackmagic to Arri. Like, they all have their own way of getting you from scene referred to display referred. You can, if you choose to, creatively mix them up, but you need to understand why it is that you're doing that, because each manufacturer is capturing as much data as possible. And essentially you're going, and this quote I got from Colin Kelly, if you have a 10-pound bag of data, that is your scene referred, but your display can only show perhaps a 5-pound bag. What data do you choose to keep and what do you choose to lose? That is what the manufacturers and their data scientists and the color scientists have decided which way to traverse to get us to display. And that's where things can get a little tricky, but they've given you all the tools. So it's not like you're flying blind, but you can actually mix them up and see which color space can get you closer.
I mean, isn't it more like it's got a 10-pound bag? HDR is like the 5-pound bag, and 709 is like the 1-pound bag. Like you get this little doggy bag that you get to show.
Yeah, you get like
right?
the little plastic bag and things are leaking out.
Right.
Yeah, that's essentially it, because things are just like at the limits. But that's interesting because most of the image that you look at and you work on, if you look at a CIE graph, most of the image that you usually work in actually sits within the Rec 709. The problem has always been things that go right past get pushed back in, and you start to see some clipping, things starting to look slightly unnatural. But most of the image that you will look at actually sits within there, unless you're doing a documentary about the Amazon forest and there are colors in there that need to be pushed out there for us to get the feel of what it is to be there in person.
That's fascinating. And are the cameras that we're working with today, because people are working with such a variety. I mean, you've got pros up there on the top with Alexas and Millennium, and down at the low end, people are shooting on iPhones and stuff like that. Where did all these various things, how big bags are coming in? Are they generally increasing the size of the color signal coming in, or some better than others? What's your thought about what we shoot on today?
Yeah, so most pro cameras nowadays can capture a lot of dynamic range. And that's usually like the term that everybody goes for, like how many stops of dynamic range. Now, Arri has been the most accurate, and sometimes they undersell what they can capture. That's why at the top end, most DPs actually go for the Alexas. Their color science is amazing. So most cameras nowadays, whether it's a Venice, a Blackmagic, Sony, Canon, Arri, they capture a lot more data than you actually need. We tend to focus on, from a DP point of view, we're not working in 17 stops of dynamic range at the end, right? We're trying to find a pivot point, which is usually your 18% gray. It's usually a pivot point for you to work in ratios, because it's not about the pure black or the pure white. It's about what image are you trying to represent and recreate. And usually it's a face. And a face is a three-dimensional object, right? Which you're trying to recreate for a two-dimensional plane on your screen. And the ratios is what gives you that form that you're looking for, that is appealing to the eye. So usually you will have things based, let's say, for example, for me, I will sit around that 400 mark on an SDR scale. If you're slightly lighter, you might go like a step above. If you're dark, sexy chocolate, you'll be a step and a half or two down. But it's the ratio between your key and your fill that they are shooting for, right? It's not particularly a lighter luminance. It's more of a ratio, because you're trying to capture as much of the form as possible. And that's what is going to translate to better storytelling.
Cool. We're going to dive into the questions. Let's just do a couple here, and I want to hear you talk more as topics come up. Feel free to expound as much as you want. So let's get to the first question. Okay.
And the first one's from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. What lighting temp works best for skin tones?
That's a very creative intent type of answer. So I'd give you a Mickey. It really depends. It really depends what you're trying to get to at the end, because there are scenes, if you look at scenes, let's like from the latest 7, like the last 007 movie, right? Their main focus is actually the skin tones. But if you look throughout the film, you'll have very cool scenes and very warm scenes, and be out in the desert or in Italy or underground. And if you sample the skin tones, it's everywhere, right? So your creative intent about what the story is trying to say at that point is going to dictate what temperature your light and the scene should be at that time.
So are those colors and DPs trying to match the skin tone to the environment constantly? So they will have a different skin tone if they're outside than they're inside, as opposed to, I just want to try to make them all right and all normal, right, and that's it?
Right. That's a creative decision, and it's an ongoing conversation. But the DP and the set designers and the grips and everybody spend a lot of time getting that ratio between the fill and the key and everything on the face is correct. So when you get that footage, be careful that you don't destroy what they were trying to get on set. Your purpose is to be a good shepherd of this data and make it look a little bit better as it goes by you.
Cool. All right, next question.
And it's from Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington. He says, what are Charles' thoughts about the colorlab.ai website?
So it's a great plugin, and Dado, I've known Dado for a couple of years now, and he is truly passionate about color and color science. And you could tell now his hair is like crazy, like he's gone full color scientist now. It is a great tool. It helps you understand where we came from using film stocks and where we're going as far as how to quickly get us in the right place to actually get to the grading, right? Because you have steps, and usually like the assistant colorist would be doing the job that Color AI is starting to get into. It'll start to balance things out. It can give you some options for look development or CDLs, and it can get you on the right path. And especially with Resolve, if you set up your node tree correctly, you can go straight from Color Lab into Resolve, and it'll put the looks and tweaks into the right nodes that you you actually choose, which is fabulous. It's definitely starting to use a lot of AI, and it's actually heading in the right direction. Is it going to replace a person like Walter Rapato or Tom Poole? No, but it's not trying to. It's trying to help you get past the hard steps in the beginning where you're trying to balance everything out so you can get to the fun part to do a color grade. So a lot of the color correction, it's assisting you with that, right? But then once you get past that, then we can start to have some fun. So,
okay, fair enough. Next question.
And next question comes in for me, from Courtney Gooden. Do you take the target viewing environment into consideration when creating an HDR grade? For example, a darkened theater versus home video or TV in a lighted room.
Yeah, that used to be the standards. You had to have a grading suite to be able to do grading. Is that still your feeling, Charles? I know that's where you're sitting.
Yes, and yes. So the two things that you have to remember between film in a theater and in your living room is in a theater, light is being bounced off of a screen and it reacts differently, right? So usually when you are doing a grade for film distribution, that final grade is actually done in a theater. Like they will go there and do a grade in a theater because things don't translate as well just going from a room like this and then just projecting that. Things are a little bit off. So for you to get from the colorist point of view and the DP's point of view and directors, you do the final grade for theater delivery at a theater. Your room has always been something that you want to control because you're working with light. So you want to control as much of the light as possible. My room is completely gray, and I usually do most of my grading in the evenings where I can control everything. And it's a neutral gray. It's an N5. I tend to pick everything in my room to be as desaturated and muted as possible. So the only color that I'm perceiving is actually coming from the image that I'm working on. So,
can you talk a little bit about how your eyes adjust over the course of time? Everybody I've read about grading says that at a certain point, watching for hours, you can't really make the same qualitative decisions you made.
Yes, I have a timer on my watch that I will step out of my room and go outside every 45 minutes. Yeah.
So beyond that, you feel your eyes are adjusting and you will not see colors accurately as you did in the beginning of your session.
It is also for the health of your eyes. It's not good for you to be staring at a fixed distance because you're staring at a screen that it's representing a 3D space, right? But you're looking at a fixed point, as a fixed distance, right? So for your eyes to sort of reset, it's good just to take a break every so often. I try to do it as often as possible. And it's mostly to preserve my ability to make decisions and also for the longevity, because if you grade for 8 hours straight, what will usually happen is that the grade that you did in the beginning will look slightly different from the grade that you did 8 hours in. And that's what you want to avoid. Because usually with the times that we had, with the turnaround times, you really need to be at your best the majority of the time. You know, I would like to say all the time, but that's humanly impossible, right? So you want to preserve and protect your eyes because your eyes are naturally trying to balance constantly. And you have to recognize that's your body doing what your body does and you're not going to stop it. So the best way for you to survive is to learn what your body is actually doing and take breaks as often as you can, stay hydrated, control the lighting within your room as much as possible, and make sure that as you're doing your grade, go back to what you did originally and see if you are naturally starting to drift. And if you are, you might want to reset just for a bit.
And is there a touchstone? Do you go back and look at skin tones or something like that, or is it just dependent on the footage?
It depends on the footage, but my usual go-to is that I will go outside and I will naturally start to look at the horizon, like whatever is the furthest point out, right? Just to give my eyes a bit of a contrast between staring at something that is a couple of feet away to staring at something that's a few miles away, you know. And I will naturally look for things that are reflective in color. Now, most things that we grade are reflective in color: skin, clothes, backgrounds. Most things are not starting to emit light, you know, like the sun, maybe flashlights, light bulbs, you know, things like that. Perhaps some reflections in water, car windshields, stuff like that. But most of the time you're working with reflective colors, and you want to reset to not the subject that you're looking at, but what is it that you're looking at? What are you seeing? Is this hue of this leaf natural, you know, compared to what you were grading in your room? And very quickly, once you start to pick that up, you'll learn, oh, that green that I might have been doing, it looks cool, but it's completely unnatural. And then that'll go back to your creative intent of the DP and the director. Where are we going with this?
Cool. We have a couple of questions from the panelists. Alex?
I really think that what you need is a room. It's a holding room. It's kind of like when you go into the CDC, when you have to go into the thing where they spray you, but instead it's just gray. It's just a gray room. You just go in there and it's just like neutral gray.
Call it the grim room.
You just sit there for 5 or 10 minutes and meditate and just stare at the gray, and then walk into your color space. I think that would be a perfect.
That sounds amazing to me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the gray holding room would be perfect for that.
He's in color quarantine for now. He'll be back in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
exactly. But the one thing, the green room, it's the gray room.
I also, you know, a lot of the designs that I do for websites and stuff like that, I mean, I don't design the websites, but I make requests. You'll notice that a lot of them are darker and gray. And the reason I do it very, very specifically is so that the photos pop. You know, I want you to be looking at the color of the photos that are there, not the site itself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've done a lot of motion graphics in my life, and most of the time what you want for lower thirds and graphics is to add to the story, not take away from the subject. So we would do exactly that. Every so often you'll get something that is monster trucks, you know, Sunday, and the lower third will have a monster truck coming through, and it'll just be as crazy as the footage. But 95% of the time, you want the lower thirds and the graphics to be assistant in the storytelling, not pull you away from it.
Yeah. As I expected, Courtney's got a little one here, but we have now blown up questions. We have tons of questions, so we're going to accelerate a little bit. But Courtney, go ahead and weigh in.
Yeah, I was wondering, I am constantly bothered by going over to friends' houses to watch a movie or something that was graded probably for the theater. I assume maybe they did a separate grade for streaming, on 4K streaming, and their TV is maladjusted and night scenes are just not viewable. You can't see anything. They're too dark. There's not enough. Is this comes from an HDR grade being misinterpreted by the TV? Does the TV have to have ambient light detection turned on or off? What's your feeling on that? And what in general, how do you deal with the fact that an HDR signal may make things worse in a uncontrolled viewing environment?
All that in a minute and a half. Charles, go.
Okay, go. Yeah. So the problem is a lot of the time people buy TVs at Best Buy when we go to see them. Those TVs are set to, I would say, egregious settings. That the most saturated is the most contrasty, which is not what the creative intent of the director was. There are some TVs nowadays that you could actually dial it back to a Hollywood setting, you could say, or like a neutral, right? But unfortunately, most TVs by all manufacturers for the most part are sold on how bright and saturated, but they lose the creative intent on the way to getting there, you know. And that's something that, as much as creators would love to control, you know, that's a decision of the consumer at home and how they want to view things.
Next question.
Next question in from me. Thoughts or tips for color using iPhone cameras? No, it's not for me. I'm sorry, I get bounced.
The next one is Jason Panks, I think, from Nashville.
Yeah,
but that
Jason
is what you
Panks.
were reading. Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
So thoughts and tips for using color and iPhone camera.
So the iPhone cameras are doing many processes in camera that are trying to help you get the best image possible. Now, if you have an older phone, it's doing a little bit less than that. But the newer phones are doing a lot of post-processing. They're taking a bunch of images at different exposures for the background, for the subjects, and trying to find the best combination. And it's trying to recreate what your eye does naturally, which is if you're looking at, let's like a bonfire and a person on the other end, and if you look in between the two, your eye will naturally start to bring down the exposure on the fire. So you could actually still see that it's fire and it's not completely blown up, but you could actually still notice the person on the other side. A sensor on its own can't do that. So the processing is trying to do that for you. So the images are starting to look a bit more natural to the way that you perceive them in real life. So as far as color for your phone, it's doing the best that it can, and it's doing a lot more than most people would be able to do on their own, especially the newer phones. So I would just leave it as is. It's trying to help you as much as it can.
So, Charles, if you were going to go out and shoot something on one of the more modern iPhones, last couple of, how would you have the settings? Just leave it default, everything, and just go for video? Would you put it in RAW? What would your choice be?
This goes back to, well, what is my end game? Am I going to do a bit of post-production on this, or am I going to hand this off to my aunt that just wants to see me doing some tango dancing on the pier?
There you go.
Right? So, yeah.
So, and you would shoot RAW if you were going to, for sure, post, but if you're just giving it to her, leave everything default and enjoy the color that they've cooked up for you.
Exactly. Leave it as it is doing the best that it can, is doing amazing things. And she's going to be more than happy. If I shoot RAW and do whatever I do and then give it to her, she's probably not going to notice the difference. She's just happy that she's seen an image. So once again, it depends on your final delivery.
Okay, fair enough. Next question.
I'm waiting for it to move because I don't know what order it's going to be in. All right, I'll just start reading. Here we go. Robert Shoji from Los Angeles. Any advice on calibrating my 2019 MacBook Pro monitor when used during correction?
So calibrating. Yeah,
so for most laptops, and I actually do have that same laptop over here. It's not my Zoom machine. I never calibrated that monitor. I did test it, and I knew that it sat well within a respectable range for me just to look at stuff. You can use like an X-Rite, it's pretty simple. There's a bunch of YouTube channels that actually go through the process of explaining that. But then you start to realize Apple's been able to pull off something pretty amazing where at volume, they can give you screens that their delta from what the signal is sending to what you're seeing is actually very, very good. Very, very good. So I haven't done much calibrating on those screens, but it's only because I haven't needed to. But if you wanted to, just to get that extra little bit, and it's the only screen you have, you can get an X-Rite. There's a lot of YouTube channels that explain that. Just buy some equipment. It's not going to be that expensive. And you just have to go through the process. But make sure that you do a reading first and a reading post just to see how your delta changed. And you realize what Apple's been able to pull off. It's pretty amazing.
All right, let's see if we can get, no, that one is that Mitch question is hung up. So let's go to the next one from Robert Shoji.
Robert Shoji asks, any recommendations for a sub $500 monitor that can be used during color correction?
So what are you working on would be my question. As long as you know the limitations of your monitor, and it's not too out of range. Most of the BenQ monitors are on the lower range, but they tend to be pretty good with Rec 709. They tend to cover most of it. Out of the box, they're pretty decent. They might have like a delta of a 2, 1.7, something like that, which is actually way under the professional recommendation, which it tends to be around 3 for consumers and a 2 for professionals. In that price range, it's more about you understanding the limitations of a screen. But nowadays, most screens will cover Rec 709 fine in SDR, and you should be okay. It's more important to know how to work your pipeline. A lot of us at first can get hung up on what monitor to get for this and that. So it's more important what pipeline you are working through, because Rec 709, you can view it on almost any screen nowadays, and it's going to be pretty accurate. You have to be really, really off to actually notice a difference.
That stuck question too was, what's your favorite reference monitor for grading? So do you have a favorite?
Well, yes,
right now?
I do.
Okay.
Yes. Flanders Scientific has been my cornerstone. I have a XM55 1U on the wall right now that I've done for most of the SDR and some HDR work. If you are working on SDR, they have the DM241 from Flanders Scientific. Now, these are not made in large volumes. These are made just for the industry, so the prices are going to reflect that. A DM240, I think it's around $4,000 at the moment. My monitor was $11,000. I've also used the XM310. When that came out, that was $45,000. It came down to around 25, and then that was discontinued. And now Flanders is coming out with the XM312 that is going to be able to do 2,000 nits full screen and 5,000 nits max, and I believe it's a 20% window. And I have to say, out of the box, Flanders, it's always been on point. And you call them, their customer service is amazing. It's like calling a friend. It's like calling Alex. Hey, I have a question. You know, it's just, they are always there, and they will always try to help you the best that they can. They helped me to get this before the pandemic and other monitors. In the middle of the pandemic, I would always go with Flanders. Before, you could have gotten the Sony X300, which was the go-to in the industry, but the panel manufacturer stopped making them. So those went away, which was very sad.
Okay, let's try to get the Sky Gleason question.
Sky Gleason, Seattle, Washington. Best practice for post-production versus live. If you have multi-cameras, GoPro, DJI, iPhone, Blackmagic, all in one show.
It's going to be interesting. But the main thing that you want to do is try and get them into one color space. Which of the cameras is taking the bulk of the show? Is it Blackmagic's? Right? So if you have Blackmagic, okay, that can be your working color space, right? Or you can transfer those. What I like to do is transfer those into a log C, right? And then that'll be my working scene referred space. And if you're working in Resolve, all you need to do is do a color space transform from what you captured to a scene referred log space that you want to work in. And then everybody will be playing in the same sandbox. And then at the end, you do a technical out to your Rec 709 or your HDR, HLG, whatever you want to do. But try and get everything, it's pretty simple, but just try to get everything into the same working space so you could see how things, exposures work, contrast ratios, and then you'll have a much easier time.
Okay. Next one up.
Henry Ramos from Yonkers, New York. Newbie looking to try color grading. Planning to shoot a dancer with a Sony a7 II or R3. Which profile do you suggest? Going to use DaVinci Resolve Studio.
I don't shoot that much with Sonys, but S-Log, shoot as raw as possible is actually my my starting point. Get as much data as you possibly can. Get as large of a file as possible, especially if you want to start experimenting with color grading, because what you want to be able to do is push and pull and manipulate the image so you get to understand how the image responds to what it is that you're doing. And the larger the color space that you capture, the more data, the less the image is going to break. You never want to work and push and pull an image in Rec 709 because it's the smallest container. It will break. The image will bend, it will break. You'll see some issues. So shoot as raw or as log as possible. I think in S-Log, you should be fine. And in Resolve, there's a lot of tools in there for you to do it, say in Node, where you're going to do it yourself and manage the color yourself, or you could let Resolve help you do the color management. Now, that's another conversation we can get into, but I would start raw, get the largest file possible, and just start to play because you just want to see what the sandbox is doing.
Fair enough. Next question.
And Josh Kaufman weighs in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When watching a piece of media, short form or long form, what color decisions, artistic or practical, stand out to you first?
Exposure. Exposure is the first thing that I look for. If I'm going to be working on something, the first thing that I will check is my exposure, because that'll dictate where my ratios are or what was the intent of the DP on set. That's the first thing, exposure, because you're trying to get, it's usually a face or some subjects in a comfortable space for the eye, and that ratio and exposure is the most important thing, right? So that's the first thing that I look for, is the exposure.
Okay.
After that
good. That sounds perfectly reasonable. What do you ever get badly shot footage from folks where they've left auto iris on or something like that, and the exposure changes as clouds go by or as something happens? Or are you working now in a world where DPs don't allow that to happen?
I have both clients. It's really funny. The more expensive the production, the less work I have to do. So yes, some broadcast stuff that I still do for clients, because I still do graphics for them, they will get footage from everywhere. If you have something that is constantly shifting, it's going to take you some time, but essentially you're almost going to have to keyframe the exposure to balance most of that out before you start to do your grade. So that'll be a lot of extra color correction that you have to do, but it's not impossible, and people do it all the time.
All right, next question.
And it's from me. How do we apply color grading signs to our live Zoom meetings?
Ooh.
So, and this is a conversation that we've had before, and I can see a lot of the panel is doing the warm skin tones because that's where we naturally are. And then we do something that it's at the opposite end of the color wheel, which is something cooler to create not only just contrast with light and dark, but color contrast, which will separate the image, right? Now, we can't go too far, but essentially, those are the tools that we can use. First, the contrast, because where your eyes are focusing more, it's going to be most sensitive to light and dark contrast. Outside of that, it's going to be most sensitive to color contrast, right? So if you use those two together, you get the best image possible you can get.
Next question.
Next question from Tom Ferguson in Phoenix, Arizona. Charles, your thoughts on the Apple Studio display?
I think it's great for what it is. It does have its limitations, But as I said before, for Apple to be able to put out in mass production screens that all sit relatively in the same place, it's actually pretty amazing. If you're doing Rec 709 work, it's fine. Its contrast is not as great, but you don't really need it to be. So as long as you know the limitations of the panel, then you know what sandbox you're working with. But it is a very nice monitor. I'm actually waiting to see what Apple does with their revision of the Pro XDR, because technically they do have a lot of technology that can surpass some of the professional monitors out there. Will they do that? Probably a cost consultant question at that point.
Next question.
Sky Gleason from Seattle, Washington. Charles, thoughts about the built-in color correction systems in Final Cut Pro 10 and Premiere?
So this is just me. I personally don't like do anything for me that I don't understand first. If I don't understand what the pipeline behind the scenes is doing, I can't trust it. And only because I can't then give that to a client, right? If it's just for me, it's perfectly fine. But if I have a client that has a special request and I don't understand every single step in the pipeline, I'm going to be putting myself in a very bad position, and I'm just going to end up looking bad and probably losing a client. So I need to know what that pipeline is. And I've seen one or two people in Final Cut where we're trying to figure out what it's doing behind the scenes, and we haven't been able to figure it out. I'm not a Final Cut user, so maybe there's some things that I don't know, but they couldn't figure it out, and they're Final Cut users, and that's where we had a bit of issue. So that's my only caveat there.
Well, back in the early days of Final Cut, it took a lot of grief because it had the color board, and that was its only color grading tool. And it was a pretty rudimentary thing. I barely could get, I could get footage to look sort of decent, but that's as far as it went. They added a few more things, and I don't know if I can pull this up. Yeah, so they gave us color wheels, which we had never had before. They gave us curves, which we had not had before. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting, and then HuSat curves, which we hadn't had. And in all those cases, it was a matter of learning a new language for me, understanding. And particularly when I got into the HuSat curves things, and asking myself things like, why did they put orange in there? That was the one that was different. And somebody said, well, that'll help you a ton more understanding that I didn't have, and that only people who study this and are careful with it can even take the things that are built in to these mass market tools and use them with intent. I learned a lot of humbleness when I saw the new tools come out. Next question.
Talalik Miguel Lopez Waterman in Brevard, North Carolina. It seems that the aesthetic for color over time has raised in color temperature. Is this a result of technology or just a shift in style?
Now, that's interesting. It can be a shift in accessible technology, because as soon as something new comes out, we just want to run at it as quickly as possible and test it until it breaks. I think the saturation is just a slow development of what we could actually have our displays recreate as accurately as possible. And now screens are doing from Rec 709 into P3, and now we're slowly heading into Rec 2020. Things that can be and should be more saturated can be now, instead of before where you had to make creative decisions about how to separate something that should be really saturated from something that should be slightly less muted. So as we push with technology, we'll creatively find a way to run at the wall with it and see where it breaks.
Cool. Next question.
Jason Panks from Nashville, Tennessee. Have you tried the Apple TV color correction feature using an iPhone?
I have not at home, but I have in my friend's house, and it actually helped his TV a lot. I have a Dolby Vision capable TV, And when I turned it on, it said, "Oh, you're fine. You don't need it." But I have seen some family members actually use it, and it brings a neutrality, and it takes away maybe a color wash that you just don't see anymore after a certain amount of time because your eye is naturally adjusting. So if that's your TV, that's where you get used to, right? But it is a pretty cool tool, and I was actually happy that they came out with it.
Next question. We still have 8 to go in the next 10 minutes, and we should be able to do that pretty easily. Next one.
Talalek Miguel Lopez Waterman, Brevard, North Carolina. Color fatigue. Have you had to have a conversation with a DP or director and ask them to give the audience a break from a certain color in their film?
That is not my job. That is not my job.
Those of us who've been on bigger sets know you don't cross boundaries sometimes at all.
Like the DP, DOP, the director, they have a vision and a creative intent, and your job is to, 1, don't mess that up. 2, enhance it in whichever way they could not on set, maybe because of time constraints or a CG or anything like that, but your job is to enhance the film. Essentially, color grading is the art of removing the things that you don't want.
Nice. Next question.
Jason Panks from Nashville, Tennessee. Color correction pros and cons of DaVinci Resolve versus Final Cut Pro.
All right, so I don't want to get in trouble, but so I've said this before. DaVinci Resolve, it started off as a finishing color grading tool. That was where it started way before Blackmagic even bought it. And Final Cut started off as an editor, right? And the two have slowly been working at getting closer to each other. Right? So Resolve has an edit page and a cut page and a media page, and then Final Cut has added some color tools throughout time just because you tend to need those things. Since I focus in color and I need to get as much from the image as possible, I will always work in DaVinci Resolve, or let's say in Baselight, or let's say in Mystica, right? Those are the main 3. I'm not an editor, but if I was to get into editing, I think Final Cut is amazing.
Okay, next question.
Chris Widener from Lafayette, Indiana. I've had challenges doing color matching between drone shots and my full frame equipment. Some of the height transition shots end up just a little off.
Well, we can get into discussion about what you find as a little off, because as you play a timeline down, jumping from one image to another, you need to get that fluidity, the visual rhythm. And that could just be a lack of knowledge in color transform of getting from the gamma that was captured in drone, right, to your working space or to display. It can be done. I've done it before. If you have any questions, just reach out to me. I'm sure we'll find a solution.
Excellent. Next question.
Robert Shoji from Los Angeles. Is color correction more science or creative?
Ooh.
The reason why I love color grading is because it's the perfect mixture of data, color science, and creativity, because you can't have one without the other. The people that figured out how to get a display to display colors accurately need the creatives to put something on that display, right? So the conversation is always going to be between the creatives and the color scientists pushing things together. It's a yin and yang. It goes hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. It would not exist.
Would it be fair to say that if you don't understand it, you can't affect it to make it what the director wants, so that you definitely need some technical understanding in the color science field to be able to actively do what they want you to do?
I would say that, especially nowadays, for smaller remote teams like myself, right? Usually you would have an office and an IT guy and a color scientist. And if you had any questions about, okay, I want to move from this color space to like HSV, right? Because I'm trying to get a bit more saturation in these colors and I'm not getting it with the tools that I have, right? So they would help you, assist you, get you in and out of a different color space that extract from the image what you want.
And that brings to mind one more real quick. I don't want to take too much time on this, but when you're discussing this with the director, if the director, do you have directors who say, it's not right, I don't know what it is, figure it out? I mean, that must be frustrating if they can't articulate. What do you want directors to tell you to get you where you want to go?
So I don't want to upset anybody. That usually happens on the lower budget things. At the top end, the director and the DP have been having conversations about what it is that they're trying to get to for months or years at times. They know what they want, and they know if you're not getting there. And usually the conversation ends up, it can be very simple as far as a change in printer lights, maybe like a stop or two of green or red or something like that. But usually on big productions, you will have a colorist and DI from the beginning of just doing the test shoots. So there is no question about where we're going from the beginning. If the production couldn't afford that from the beginning, then you are probably going to have more situations towards the end where we need to have more creative conversations to see if we could get to where we're trying to get to.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Next question.
Talalik Miguel Lopez Waterman from Brevard, North Carolina. Do you ever look at an image in black and white to look at exposure?
Yes, all the time. Yes, I will sometimes take the entire timeline and turn it black and white just to see where things sit, because usually the color will distract us at times from what we're looking at. And if I'm trying to get the exposure right, and if I'm trying to build the image like a sculpture, I'm trying to bring the eye to focus on a particular thing. The first place that I will go to is black and white. I want to make sure that the thing that I want to pinpoint in attention has a bit more contrast, maybe a little bit brighter and a little bit darker in the darks. And then everything else that I want you to kind of not pay attention to, I'll bring those things back. And then I'll start to play with colors. Like we said before, the contrast is going to bring attention, right? So I will work with that exposure first and then bring the contrast of color to just tie it all in.
Cool. Next question.
Next question coming in from Peter Belbin in Houston. Grading for theaters, are they reasonably consistent regarding uniformity of screen reflection of RGB wavelengths? How about laser versus incandescent projector light sources? I'm guessing they aim for consistency, but do they often fail to meet it?
So one of the things that a lot of guys in their fields, guys and girls in the colors field will not do is go to random theaters to see how their movie is looking. Because if it's not in Dolby Theater or IMAX Theater, those are maintained on a daily basis, things tend to drift, and remember that a theater is a business and they're trying to, stay in the profit, and calibrating those machines is not exactly cheap. But things do tend to drift. I do have to say that the laser projections that I've seen for home use are really amazing. And I think right now it's the closest to Rec 2020 that we can get from what I've seen. So yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, things do drift.
Okay, we're down to the last question, and we got a minute and a half here.
Sky Gleason, Seattle, Washington. Can you talk about your process? Is there a sequence you do of color balance and then color grade?
Yes. So if I'm doing a simple grade, the first 3 nodes that I will usually have in my pipeline is the first is exposure, right? Second is going to be a color balance. And I'll do that with my printer lights to where I get a good sense of color separation and the skin tones are good to my eye. Not necessarily to the skin tone line, because that depends on what color is on either side of the subject. Right? So the skin tone, the skin tone line is good as a reference, but pay attention to what other colors are in the scene because they will perceptually change what you feel that skin tone is. And that's more important than being right on that line. And then after that, I will work on my color saturation, more color boost to get the attention to where I want a little bit more. After that, I'll start to do some windowing. And then past that, if there's any like bits of beauty, if I'm taking out like some moles or like a pimple, something like that. But yeah, usually it's the exposure and then the balance and then a bit of saturation, color boost, plus or minus, depending on where I want.
Nice answer. Charles, I can't tell you how exciting and how fun it was to have you here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We're going to roll the credits really fast just so we can kind of finish up here at the top of the hour. But I hope you will grace us on the panel as much as you can in the future. It is always great to have you here. And
it's my pleasure. I miss you guys.
Yeah, don't be a stranger. We miss you too.
We miss you too.
Yeah.
So that's it. We will see you all in after hours. Thanks for coming to the show. Roll credits.
That was pretty cool.
A lot.
That was awesome.
So great to see you.
There's credits now?
Oh yeah, we actually and then we whisper under the credits, except for Mitch.
It's amazing.
He's just difficult.
Jump into after hours.
Yeah.
This place.
You managing to stay
over
cool
there
in New York?
Bye-bye.
It's 91 degrees outside.
Oh no, that's not New York good.
It's Severn in England.
It's 55 degrees here, just in case you're wondering. Might get up to 80.
Yeah, keep rubbing it in.
74 and clear in San Diego. Sorry.